on these sorts of things.
Why don't we quickly demonstrate what a mock rupture and repair process can look like, just so that they get an idea off of that. Like if
we're doing a role play here.
Yeah, we're doing a role play here. If I was a disruptive, I'll be your client, I guess. Client here, right? Chat, make up a fucking scenario. I don't care, like attachment wise. Just pick a topic that we've gone over in one of the things, and I'll try and wear a mask or something. And Brady will go ahead and try and cause this rupture and repair, so you guys get to see it firsthand how it's like. AZ already. I'm gonna take notes. This is from my book.
Notepads out.
You have a history.
You're Paul. Oh no.
Okay. We can't just say I'm Paul. You have a history of bad breakups. I like the history of bad breakups. You know.
Right.
All right. Fuck it. Let's go into it, man.
Let's do it,
man. So I just can't really, I don't really understand why all of this is happening. You know, I know I'm doing the right thing. I know everything's going through, you know, everything will be fine from now on. You know, this new relationship's going to go swell. You know, everything's going 100%, man. But fuck it, dude. Like this is it. Like, you know, it'll probably be one of my last sessions. I don't think you've helped me process anything. I think it's been a lot of me doing my own work with, you know, my new significant other that's coming into my life.
Wait, what?
so like,
wait,
you know,
I'm confused about where we're starting from.
Sure, we're gonna start in the middle of a session. Yeah, I think it's a lot better for us to like. So like, we've already been seeing each other for some time. I'll give you that. And I want to.
I was following you at the first point, and then you're like, "I'm out of here," and I'm like, "Wait, are we simulating the breakup thing or the therapy trouble thing?"
So essentially, you're still the therapist, yeah?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So Brady, I know I've been seeing you for a couple of sessions. Yeah.
Right.
And man, I don't know how to put it. Like, I think our sessions have to come to a close. I've got a new significant other. Things are working out well. Yeah, you know, I don't think that I've done a lot of process work with you, but she is helping me process a lot of things. She is making me, you know, seek to her for counsel, and, you know, we're sharing income now, even though we've only known each other for a couple of weeks. You know, we're doing all of these things together.
So absolutely, you know, absolutely. I'm not out here to keep you longer than you want to be here. I do think it would be worth, you know, talking, if this is our last session, a little bit about, like, you know, you mentioned that I haven't really been able to help you a lot, and that you've kind of developed a lot of those, let's say, coping mechanisms on your own or with your new partner. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, what happens when you face the next crisis. Like, what are some of the ideas you might have about how to handle that crisis?
Well, I have my partner.
Therapy hasn't been working for you,
right? I have my partner, right? That's all I need. Yeah, I mean, Amelia is the only one I need, right? She's the only one I need to focus on, right? I mean, I'm already, like, you know, why else would I need any other partner there? You know, I wouldn't have to go search for anything else if she's perfect in every single way, like I've been describing, you know?
And have you thought about a situation where maybe she's not available?
What do you mean by that? Are you saying, what do you mean?
Well, let's say she's not around and you are facing a sort of crisis. You can't get into contact with her. What are some of the things that you would do to calm yourself down?
But are you saying that I can't calm myself down? Is that what you're saying?
I think earlier you mentioned that you have all of the tools that you need, and I'm only pointing out that if you're ready to move on for therapy, then I am totally with you, but I care about your security. I care about the tools you have available to you. And I'm just wondering, if this were our last session, how would you be in a situation where you did have to rely a lot on yourself and not on Amelia?
But you know me, we've been seeing each other for the past couple of things. You've seen me when you've stressed me out. I think I do fine, right? Don't I? Or you say, you know, or I have friends. I have natural support.
Can I ask you, how do you feel right now as we talk about this?
I'm starting to feel a little anxious. I'm not liking where you're taking this.
Was it the question I asked that made you anxious?
You're just saying that I can't be with Amelia, and, you know, she's the only, like, I can fix her and she can fix me, right? Like, But that's
So my question for you is you don't have Amelia right now in this session, and it seems that you're experiencing a lot of anxiety. I'm here to talk with you about it, but you're saying you don't want to be in therapy. So Amelia's not here. You don't want me here. What are you doing about the anxiety you're feeling right now in this moment?
I guess I'm actively trying to think, about future planning, right? I'm trying to push my thoughts forward. I'm not trying to immediately, I don't know, go into the past, if you will.
So I would like you to stick with just this moment that we're in right now. The anxiety you're feeling right now, the
Hmm.
frustration,
Hmm.
right? I can sense a little bit of difficulty expressing yourself and finding the words to really elaborate on that. I would like you to identify for me. What is the emotion you're feeling right now?
All right, and let's stop right there. Let's pause. Guys, if you guys can tell immediately, what he's doing is like, he's one empathizing immediately. It's like, hey, calling out what he sees. Hey, I'm seeing this from you. I'm seeing this from you. Even though I might come in here with like, hey, this is our last session. Hey, I'm come to disagree. Hey, my partner's the only one that I need. Hey, Amelia's everything that I need, so on and so forth. He's been pointing out certain things like, hey, what do you like? For example, Brady, one of the biggest things that you said was like, if Amelia wasn't here and I'm not here, how do you deal with it? Perfect frame of
Yeah.
reasoning right there, because it's like I'm in therapy session right now, and the only way that I'm letting out the frustration is because my therapist is here. But if I'm alone, boom, you're redirecting the conversation to, hey, are you ready? We might disagree on
Yeah.
this, but I don't think so. Go ahead.
I mean, like, this situation comes up often where the client, they have this abstract idea about like, well, my partner will always be there for me, right? And you can simply identify, well, you're feeling anxious right now, right? I think we can agree on that, but your partner's not here. And you're saying you don't need me. So you're in a situation like I'm describing where Amelia's not here, I'm not here for you. What are you doing to manage that anxiety? And the other technique that I was using, this is an intervention you use called immediacy,
Yep.
which is the client will try to jump to the future and they'll say, no, this will happen. They will always be there. This will be that way. Or they'll jump to the past. Well, it's been like this before. I've dealt with this before. They will try to get away from the present moment. And you are constantly trying to bring them back to, I understand that, Amelia might always be there or she's always been there for you before, but I want you to tell me what you're experiencing right now. I want you to stay with me in this moment, right? That's the immediacy of the conversation we're having because the anxiety is not in the future. It's not in the past. It's right now. The
And
anxiety you're having is right now and you're in a session and you're talking about it. I'm also not I'm confronting them in a way, right? Like I'm pointing out contradictions, but I'm not telling them they're wrong, right? I would never, as a therapist, tell you, no, you're wrong. You're not going to be okay without me. That's
mhm.
not my place to say, right? My place is to say, if you want to quit therapy right now, that's fine, but I want to make sure you have the tools and the responsibility to take care of yourself outside of this environment because this is an environment where you're completely safe, right? We're working in a professional context. I'm here to help you. I want you to be able to help yourself. I have always said that therapy does not end when the client is healed,
Right.
right? Therapy ends when the client is able to deal with the next crisis on their own terms
But
because no one gets to the point where they're healed.
uh,
So
uh,
that's like the simulation of a client who has had it with their therapist and they think that that's the problem and that they're going to be totally fine. I'm not trying to like hook them back in. I just want them to understand that I want to know what it's going to be like for you when you face the next crisis and the crutch you're relying on isn't actually there.
and one thing I want to point out, guys, like little role plays like this, we have to do them so often, which is like
All the time.
random fucking situation. Oh, your dad passed away. Oh, you're going through a breakup. Oh, you want to end therapy sessions. You can make up 1,001 scenarios, and I think we pretty much managed to go through a majority of them. And then we had our practicum, and we had our internship, and we had 101 things that we had to go through to be able to understand that. And as a therapist, if our job as a therapist is never to be right or wrong. Our therapist is quite literally to lead you to the answer, to lead you to whatever
Yeah,
answer that is for you.
Bunyesh, I would say that the question is a little bit hard to answer because I'm never right in therapy. The
Mhm.
client is always right. Whatever they're experiencing in the moment, like Edgar's, like the role he was playing, he is right when he is talking about that. Right now, he feels like I don't need this shit. Emilia will be there. That is an honest feeling, right? Like he really feels like he doesn't need it, and Emilia, Emilia will be there. It's not my place to tell you, no, you're wrong. You're gonna fail, and she's gonna leave you, and you're gonna be all left alone. That is not the way that you deal with it in therapy.
And if you
It's
ever have
not
a
me pointing out they're wrong. It's I want them to understand how they may not be right. But it's not me saying you're wrong. Now, there have been times where, like, I guess the only times you can be wrong is like if you just misremember something. But you go with the flow of the conversation and what the client is feeling right now. So there's never times where it's like I'm giving the interpretation that, oh, this is related to your childhood trauma, and they're like, no, you're
so
wrong. It's related to this. It's
so
not. It's not an environment of right and wrongs in
let, let,
therapy.
let's quickly role play this, yeah? Shit therapist, red flags in your therapist. If you see, ask for another therapist, do it. Brady, we'll quickly switch. You'll be client, I'll be therapist, I guess, and then we'll switch for like per red flag just so that they get a reference point.
Okay.
All right, you ready?
So you're going to be a therapist who is showing me some red flags.
Oh yeah,
You're
immediate.
you're a bad therapist.
Yeah, I'm a horrible fucking therapist. If you guys see a therapist like this, please ask for another therapist or anything like that. All right, you ready?
Okay. So what should I be coming in here with?
Or I can just go ahead and like start off immediately, you know, as
Sure,
immediate
sure.
immediate red flag, and then you just say another red flag like this. Ooh, you know, I gotta say, Brady, that shirt you're wearing makes you look really sexy. Hey, how about we get something to eat after our session? How do you feel about that?
Um, I'm feeling a little I'm a little uncomfortable with I don't know that sort of thing. I'd rather we just stick to the kind of relationship we have. You know, this has been working for me. I feel like I'm getting a lot of help from you, and in some ways I feel like I rely on you. Um, you know, to feel better, right? Like I really need these weekly sessions. When I come in here, I'm all stressed, but when I leave, I feel a lot better. And so, I do like talking to you, but I'm not sure if that's something that we're a place we should take this.
Sure, but you know, getting to understand that this is more of a safe space for you, and the fact that you're actually really comfortable opening up in all of this, it makes me wonder a little bit about your own personal safety, you know, at home. And if you ever need to go ahead and reach out to me, you know, outside of therapeutic hours, I'll go ahead and email you my number so you can reach out to me anytime. You guys see the two immediate red flags off of that, or so many fucking immediate red flags. Hi, Dale Moon, how are you? We're kind of showcasing what really, really bad therapists do. One, if a therapist ever gives you their personal phone number and tells you to contact them in any way, shape, or form outside of therapeutic hours, red flag. A therapist starts hitting on you, red flag. A therapist like starts complimenting you and like, hey, you're looking sexy. Ooh, I really like that shirt. Or starts projecting or asking more about sexual fantasies that are way out of
And
line.
I also threw my own red flag
Uh-huh.
in, which was like, as the client, oh, I really rely on you. I really depend on you,
Yeah,
right?
that
Like
attachment.
that is a moment where a lot of shit therapists will take advantage of that. And of course, if I were Ed's real client and that's how he really was as a therapist, he's probably been leading me to that point where he might have convinced me that I do really rely on him and that I can't experience happiness or calmness without him because he's trying to get me.
Trying to get you.
It's a whole different vibe from the way you you converse and you deal with someone who is kind of bringing that stuff into the session. You know, there was a question here that was like, have you ever had a client that made you so fed up they needed to stop the session? No, I would never stop the session, even if the only thing that would make me stop a session is if a client was actually a threat to me, if they were
Yeah.
threatening me. But there's nothing that they can say that will frustrate me to the point of
And
ending things. But that's also because we learn specifically the techniques to use when
right.
someone is coming at you. Like when Ed's character was like, "I don't fucking need you. You know, you're a waste of my time. I'm gonna get out of here." Like you learn how to disarm someone from that and not place it as like me versus you now.
Right.
I'm just putting it back in his hands because he's feeling out of control, and I want him to feel like this is something he can direct. He always gets to decide if this is the end of therapy. It's not my
So,
choice to tell him he's wrong.
and another big thing is just because a therapist, because one of the big things that we can do is we can literally like, take a break in session. That's fine. If we sense a lot of if we sense a lot of energy, if we sense like, hey, you know what, your anxiety is all the way through the roof and you're not in therapeutic zone, we can be like, hey, you know what, we're sensing a lot of energy, right now. Why don't we go ahead and take a quick breather, do our meditation, or take a quick 3-minute break, get some water, go to the restroom, come back into it. That's perfectly fine.
I've had clients call me out and say that like I was giving them like I was like giving them kind of fake positive sentiments, because we were doing narrative work and we were trying to work on, because they saw themselves as like very unvaluable. They didn't feel like they were good at anything. They weren't deserving of the jobs they were applying for. They weren't deserving of a good relationship. Like they had a very low self-esteem. And we were doing narrative work to undo some of those schemas and look for what we call unique outcomes, which is like, okay, you've told the story of yourself as this person with low self-esteem. I want to look at some of the ways that might not be true, right? Like we're focusing on the narrative of some of their accomplishments, that are not like, I'm not just trying to convince you that actually your life is totally sweet. No, like, but you are clearly overlooking your actual skill sets, that he was like living in a foreign country, that he had started a business, that he was extremely knowledgeable about his field, that he knows how to direct people and lead them. And it's like he was completely overlooking all these assets. But the narrative work we were doing wasn't working because he would come into session and be like, well, you're just highlighting my good qualities because you're trying to trick me into thinking my life is better than it is.
Oof.
So it's not up to me to be like, no, you're wrong and you're just not getting the technique that I'm using. No. I say, all right, if that's not the kind of thing that you want to hear, if that's not the strategy that's working for you, I'm going to adapt that strategy. I'm not going to ask you to look for these unique outcomes anymore. We're going to switch the way we do this. And we did. And I ended therapy with that person, a couple months later. And they were very thankful to me about the work that they had done. And all I can say for them is, this is work that you have done, right?
Yeah.
I'm here to help you. I'm here to facilitate you. But the work you've done is your own. It is important and it's essential for you and your client to have dialogue about the way therapy is going and what's not working, and for them to give you feedback and for you to give them feedback. Like, that's part of it. But you can't be a therapist if you have a hot head and you get offended and you get defensive and you don't like being called out, because that's not to the benefit of the client. You need to be able to take that shit in stride and say that you are absolutely right, even if they are completely wrong, and you integrate that into the next step.
But yes, guys, there are a lot of red flags in therapy. That's just some examples. If they're asking about your payment, that's a fucking red flag, guys. Like in session, if they're like, hey, have you paid? That's a really big fucking red flag, because are they really there in the session in the moment with you, or are they more caring about whether or not you've paid? So on and so forth.
They can ask you at the end when therapy is done, but don't expect them to ask you in the middle of the session.
One red flag that I had to coach a lot of the people here in Arizona about.
I just want to say one more thing to that, because I had clients who wouldn't pay me for weeks and weeks and weeks, and there comes a time where I have to be like,
yeah, you have to bring it up,
bruh. You got to pay me, like, otherwise we can't meet next week or something, So but here's not in the middle of the session. I wouldn't like gate the session behind that.
Like before the session starts or at the end of a session, that's appropriate to bring up. But in the middle of the session, that's not good. Another red flag: a therapist having this up front like this, writing everything down as you're talking. Can you guys guess why? Brady's talking, and I'm just like, Brady, say something. Just tell me a little bit about your day.
Well, I feel like the people at work really aren't listening to me. I'm talking to them, but I really feel like no one is listening to me and
Uh,
isn't looking at me when they talk to me.
right.
I just really feel like my presence doesn't even matter to them. Like, I could be in another room and they wouldn't even notice.
Hmm.
And I really don't sense a lot of attention,
And
being
that
given to me. And I don't know if that's attention that I deserve, or maybe I'm just not that interesting. I
you
don't know. What do
guys
you think?
you guys see why that's fucking horrible? He's telling me all this shit and I'm more focused on taking notes than I am
Like
about.
literally telling him that no one's paying attention to me, and he's not paying attention to me. Like, of course it's going to piss off or make the client feel like they're not a
Yeah,
part of,
because you're not
because
empathizing.
you're not in the session with them if you're taking notes.
And sadly, that's one of the big things that I have to go ahead and break with a lot of the agencies that I've worked with here is like they still believe in taking paper and pencil and taking notes up here and shit. And it's like, no, this is a barrier. Any therapist that puts this up and they're
It's
doing
a
this,
physical barrier. Yeah.
it's a physical barrier between yourself and the fucking client. That is absolute trash. Like, no.
Yeah. The only time that it's really appropriate to take notes is during the intake, right?
Yeah.
Because you are just taking notes. It's not really a session at that point. But one of the things that I would do in my practice was like, because a lot of it was online. So what I would do is I would have my tablet here, and I have my tablet here. It has a pen. I would basically have like a blank page that I could write on, that the client can also see. I would share my screen with them so that like they can see everything I'm doing when I'm writing on this, and it's like a medium for us to both communicate through. It's not me taking notes that they can't see. It's actually like, if they're talking about like their interpersonal relationships, or they're talking about like the way their narrative fits into a sort of tree structure, I can be drawing that for them. I can be like,
So,
writing down the words they say and drawing links to them, and asking them, do you see the link between these three terms that you've just used? Right?
right.
Like, it's a medium that we're both engaging with. It's not my notes that they're not a part of. It's something that we can both see. We're both building together. And then I send that to them after the session, and they can take that with them. Like, it was a very useful sort of
So,
technique
so
that really only worked because I was doing it online.
real quick, before we answer Rope Revolutionary, let me answer Blade Dragon. Hey, if also a therapist should not be fucking staring at you the entire session. They should be making you feel comfortable, building rapport. They should be empathizing with you, or like, chiming in every so often, like, hey, you know what? I couldn't possibly understand what you're going through. Or hey, can you correct me if I'm wrong? Like, I thought that you mentioned this, but this, like it should have that, like, that like I don't know, rapport being set there. Reminds me
Yeah.
out of, but anyway,
Your number one job as a therapist in your first session is to make that client feel comfortable telling you, things about themselves, and that at any time they can not share something,
right.
or they can share something in confidence. Like, your number one job in the first session is actually to make the client feel very comfortable and welcomed and at ease.
Right.
You know, when you get to actual processing, you get into what I was talking about yesterday about that optimal level of anxiety. You don't want them too low, you don't want them too high. You actually want them to have a little bit of anxiety during the session, but not during the first session. That's
So,
purely like, feel comfortable talking to me and get to know each other.
Rope, one of the big things that I will say is the first session that you have, if it's we'll talk about intake. Let's go with intake first. You have the power to say no to any question asked that you feel uncomfortable like answering. This includes in
Yes.
any session that you go forward. If there's like, for example, if I'm like, Brady, can you tell me a little bit about your sexuality or about what you like, or sexual abuse in your past, and you're not comfortable talking about that, that is perfectly okay to be like, hey, you know what, I'm not comfortable talking about this at this moment. And the therapist, a good therapist, will move on. If they stay and linger on that, that's a red flag. That is an immediate red flag because they're not considering your boundaries off of that.
Yeah,
So,
it's a red flag if they jump into processing and say like, "Oh, why don't you feel comfortable talking about that?" That is inappropriate. Like, in the intake, you are just there to get information and develop the relationship. So yeah, you absolutely tell them, look, I'm going to ask you some things that may be sensitive subjects. I might be talking, about subjects related to sexuality, sexual history, abuse, these sorts of things. If at any point you don't feel comfortable answering, we can just skip it and move on.
Right. But overall, what I would say is what you can prepare yourself, like best way to prepare yourself is number one, be open, be as open as you can be, because the more information that you share with the therapist, the genuinely that you're comfortable with, the better it's going to be for your therapeutic experience. Number two, be open to asking the therapist any questions. For example, if I was doing an intake, I'd ask what sort of therapeutic interventions do you like to specialize in, or or is there any particular issues that you run into the past where you felt like you needed supervision over? These are appropriate questions to ask.
And as the therapist, I would probably at first make a joke about this to, make the conversation a little lighter at first. I would say, well, I don't want to reveal all of my secrets to you just yet. It's something to humanize myself a little bit. And then I would tell them, well, I'm familiar with using behavioral techniques or dialectic behavioral techniques, or, then I would get into it. But I don't just want to seem robotic and like, these are the techniques I use. Here are my interventions. Here is my work experience. No, like,
And also,
I've made the joke that I like to make my clients cry, but I also like to make them laugh. Like, it is important for you to laugh in therapy as well.
also one big thing there is like, hey, if you go into, say, a therapeutic session and all they're doing is CBT, but you've been asking for deep processing work, psychodynamics, humanistic, whatever it may be, but they're only doing CBT, that's not a good therapist for you if that's the only type of therapy or intervention that they're going to use for you, which is why it's important to ask, like, hey, what interventions are you comfortable using, or being like, hey, I'm not comfortable only covering my symptoms with CBT. I want to actually process whatever. So it's okay for you to be able to ask those questions.
And Ed, what was one of the most important things that one of our professors told us as a therapist is, if something is important, right? If the client said something important and, the conversation went past it, or you missed the opportunity to jump on it, it will come up again.
Yep.
It will 100 the things that are important to discuss in therapy will 100% make their way back to the discussion, even if it is not addressed, the moment it's introduced. So as a therapist, when you are doing your intake and you're doing that first assessment, you might notice certain things where you're like, hey, that seems like an important piece of information, but you can let it be where it is for right now, because if it is important, it will come up again. That is just how things work. That is how the human brain brings up what's important. Like, you will encounter it again down the line.
And it's not even just therapy. Quite literally, it happens in anime. It happens in everything, throwing it out there. Like in anime, just because you heard it one time, guess what? It's probably going to pop up again. If it's important, it'll pop up throughout the story. It's not just going to be like one and done, unless they're really fucking anal about it. What else? Yeah, Magister, there's a 50% chance of you not getting anything. There's another 50% chance of you getting amazing shit.
Dude, that is such a scam.
Dude, that's not even me. What if a client can't attend to a session because of mental health problems? Like, he needs healing, but he's too anxious or avoidable. Nothing we can do?
No one is too healthy or too unhealthy to start therapy.
Yep.
Right? You do not need a huge problem or some huge mental health thing to go to therapy. Like, even if you don't have anything crazy going on, right? I guarantee you might go into therapy just saying, hey, I've been feeling lonely lately, right? That's not like a major crisis. Guaranteed, building off of what I just said, that important things will come up. And the more you dig into that, you're going to find stuff in therapy that is bigger than just loneliness. Because every human is complicated and we all have complexes to uncover.
One thing
if you're so mentally unwell that you can't attend therapy, as in like you physically can't, then perhaps you do need more extreme levels of help. But I he's canceling last moment.
I've had a couple of those, Professor Sawyer, and a lot of it was because they had extreme social anxiety. And
Yeah.
i.e. getting into the car and going into the therapeutic room was a lot for them. So what we ended up doing, because like they were scared enough to even go and like turn it on and turn on the cam to even do like remote therapy sessions, is I quite literally had him set up with like an automatic email thing where I was like, hey, you know what, it was his case manager, rather well said, that like pushed it through to him. Was like, let's talk about skills and like not avoiding therapeutic sessions, because if you avoid so many sessions, the therapist is going to cancel on you and they're going to find another client that needs help, you know. And
Yeah.
it's quite literally a format where it's like, hey, I'm not feeling comfortable with myself or being able to attend sessions, or it's like one click, one button click, and he would like he didn't have to worry about missing a session or having to pay a session for missing, so on and so forth. So you if you feel that way in the first session, it's important to bring it up like during intake or whenever you have the opportunity to be like, hey, you know what? I may some days like, go missing, for a couple of sessions. Like, what can we do about that? Just because my anxiety gets too high or my depression gets too high, what are your safety checks for that?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's important to talk about that. I have mine. I'm sure Brady has his own, but good talks. All right, Brady, how you feeling? You doing good?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be speaking English again.
Gonna get some sleep. Yeah. Oh, well, I'm glad that you're here. Kat, Sunday, it's gonna be my birthday stream. We're gonna do a bunch of anime, a bunch of video games, all of that. I am also getting a little bit tired because I have doing like a pre-birthday dinner because it's the weekend, with my partner, with family, all of that. So it'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun. But
Masters has a good question we can answer before we go.
sure.
How do you end relationship with a client? How do you tie things off? How do you initiate that topic? Well, you there is a phase of therapy called termination,
Yeah.
right? Which is what you're looking at at the conditions for termination, even at the start of therapy, where it's like you're assessing that from the first session or the first couple of sessions of like, okay, while we're learning about the problem the client is having and the goals they're setting for themselves with therapy, because like, you talk about that stuff. Hey, what are your goals? In this process, what sort of things do you want to work on? And maybe they don't know necessarily. Maybe they just want to explore things, and that's fine as well, right? But internally, you're also thinking about. I know termination. It sounds sinister, but that's just what it's called. It's called the termination phase. Um, you have the exploration phase, you have the termination phase, and part of that is talking about relapse prevention, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was talking with Ed about when we did the role play, which was like relapse prevention is about reviewing the skills we've developed in therapy, and if therapy were to stop tomorrow, what would you do if you faced a similar situation as the one you came in with to begin with, right? Like, what would you do in a crisis? That's what we're looking for. And if they're like, I have no idea, right? We need to review the tool set and the skills and the processing that we've done over the course of therapy for a longer period of time. But if you do relapse prevention just meaning how do you prevent them from relapsing to the way they were before therapy, you talk about that. It's its own skill set of like, here's how we review this. Here's the techniques we put in place. I had a client who at the end of therapy, I asked him like, what are you going to do to manage anxiety? And he was basically like, I might start smoking again. And I was like, that's not a good coping mechanism, right? Like, so there was more work that needed to be done there. But yeah, like we are thinking about the termination phase and the relapse
So
prevention, and that's brought up also with the client.
I usually start my whole termination phase at least 3 sessions before the final session, where it's like, hey, you know what? We're drawing close to the end of our sessions, of our times together. We'll start getting a little bit more in depth as to like closing up, summarizing, our experiences together and planning for the future. It's always good to have that in mind, what the last session might be like.
Yeah, I do often tell them like if I'm sensing the end, I tell them, okay, let's call this the beginning of the end or so, and let's meet next time, and you reflect on whether you feel like that's the last session you might need. We introduce that subject, but I also have been telling them, my idea that like you don't go to therapy until you're healed. You go until you're capable of healing on your own. Because none of my clients have left therapy feeling like they've
Yeah,
fixed themselves. That's just not how it works. You
right.
don't fix yourself. You don't fix her. You can't fix Amelia, right?
But I guess last words to leave on. Like what? Like I guess I'll go first then. Guys, practice some self-care legitimately. Good self-care, bad self-care, it doesn't fucking matter. Even destructive forms of self-care is self-care. And I will start by saying that if a therapist or parents or whatever are like, hey, that's not self-care, they try and criticize you for whatever you are doing that like relieves your stress in whatever way possible. Hey, I'm not one to judge, Brady's not one to judge. You have to practice that self-care for yourself, because at the end of the day, if you bottle that in, at some point it's going to explode. And if you can't, like,
And
go ahead.
well, my closing words would be not just self-care. Don't just do things for yourself because it's good to do that. Like, take a serious chance at developing a better relationship with yourself. Be
Yeah.
good to yourselves. Like, you don't lose anything by trying, and you will always benefit from being your own ally instead of your own adversary. Like, there's just no benefit to being an enemy to yourself.
And with that being
So
said,
try to do self-care, but also try to like learn to be a better person to yourself.